And for those of you who weren't, we had some great sessions yesterday. We had India Psychedelic with Siddharth Bhatia and Jai Arjun Singh, and the Lit Selfie with Meeta Kapoor, VK Kartika, Jai Arjun Singh, and R. Sriram. So I'm just going to give a little bit of a backgrounder. Litmus is essentially a contemporary lit fest. It's done by an agency called For Young India, which is a youth experiential agency and is powered by Bangalore Mirror. I'd just like to thank all our partners. Appu Pen, Samita Arni, Vishwajyoti Ghosh in conversation with Pratik Thomas about how the graphic novel is weaving rich new narratives. I'll just give you a brief introduction. If you all could just come on stage. Appu Pen is a comics creator and artist who tells stories from the mythical world Halala. He does not like to be called George Mathin. His first graphic novel, Moonward, published by Blaft in 2009, was selected for the 2011 Angoulême Festival in France. His second silent graphic novel, Legends of Halala, was published in January 2013. Harper has called it India's first silent graphic novel and is releasing Appu Pen's next offering, Aspirus, in June 2014. His comic art has also found its way into most Indian magazines and a few renowned art galleries. His paintings and commissioned murals can be seen in many cities across India. Samita is a global citizen, having lived in Indonesia, Pakistan, India, Thailand, Italy, and USA, and has worked at interesting jobs, including professional dishwasher, hotel maid, assistant director on a documentary film, caregiver, TV reporter on the fashion show Beat, editor, light board operator, and most recently head scriptwriter on an Afghan TV series in Kabul. Her inherent talent and passion for writing and illustrating saw her creating her first graphic novel, The Mahabharata, A Child's View, at age 12. It was published in 7 languages and sold 50,000 copies worldwide and won several awards and commendations. Her second book, Sita's Ramayana, a graphic novel developed in collaboration with Patwa artist Moina Chitrakar, was in the New York Times bestseller list for graphic novels for 2 weeks in 2011. Her latest book, The Missing Queen, is a speculative fiction mythological thriller and has been published by Penguin and Zuban. Vishwajyoti Ghosh, he is a graphic novelist, cartoonist, and columnist based in Delhi. His creation, Full Toss, a cartoon column, is run by Hindustan Times, the Sunday edition. He is the author of critically acclaimed graphic novel Delhi Calm, a political graphic novel set during the emergencies of the 70s. Times New Roman and Countryman, authored by him, is an interesting visual book of classified ads. His eclectic career has seen him job hopping across the subcontinent with organizations in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. As a founding member of the Power Collective, he also remains an active and dynamic participant in graphic comic artists collective projects and works often with graphic artists from different parts of South Asia. A mechanical engineer moved by design, Pratik Thomas is an alumni of the prestigious NID Ahmedabad. He studied product design, and the first few years after college, he conceptualized rides and attractions in a theme park project. He dabbled in writing stories and animation scripts for children, and finally started Manta Ray, an Indian publishing house with Dilip Cherian. He is also the author of Hush, a silent graphic novella that was originally conceived as a short film by his brother Vivek. He has also conceptualized and written 2 silent short comics, Rather Lovely Thing and Voyeur, which were featured in the anthology collection Mixtape. His latest venture is his own studio. I'm going to let him speak about it. And I'd just like to call all of you all on stage. We're going to have a session for half an hour each. And we'd like to time it because our day is packed. We have 10 sessions. And we just take questions after half an hour for a couple of questions for 15 minutes.
What you want me to hold it while you Good morning, everybody. Am I clear enough? Yeah? Okay. So, since they're all comic creators and what we heard as a verbal introduction, I'm going to ask Samita, Vishwa and Apupen to introduce their work. And probably not all of you have seen the work that they've done. I mean, you just probably heard it. So it'd be good to actually have an introduction of the books that they've done so you can see it on screen, and then we probably get into the session full time. So, you want to start with your work? Can we have Samita's work up on the screen, please? Thanks.
Thank you. And thanks all for coming out on a Sunday
Thank you everybody
morning.
for coming so early in the morning. Thank you so much.
It's nice to see something that's close to a full house at 10:30 in the morning. I'll just give this a couple of seconds, but I'll just, Sita's Ramayana is a sort of a graphic novel collaboration, as the introduction mentioned. Next slide, please. Yeah. I'm just going to just keep going through the slides. I just wanted to give people a sense of the artwork, because I think the artwork is the main thing about this book. My role as a graphic novelist, as a writer, is secondary to sort of the stuff that Moina worked with. And Sita's Ramayana attempts to retell the Ramayana through the Patua tradition. It's the Patua retelling of the Ramayana, which begins with Sita in the forest, sort of in media res. Sita's in the forest, the first image that you saw, crying and telling her story to the forest, and that's how we begin. So it's really different from other Ramayanas because it's very much mediated by Sita's perspective, and we wanted to preserve that in this version, even though we interpolated aspects of other versions like Kamban's Kamba Ramayana into it as well. But can you just keep scrolling through the images I think just to give you a sense of how the images and the text work together. I think since we're pressed for time, that's enough of an introduction.
No, I think you should take your time because I think the visuals speak the most. So take your time, show what you want to show. And
anyway, so yeah, I think the art speaks for itself and doesn't need me to comment on it.
Do you have the book? Interestingly, the book was done on sheets of paper. So the art came first before Samita actually came into as a writer. So it's actually a wordless narrative which is given words, and it wasn't conceived as a comic first. So it is after the artwork was done that she came in. And in that process, did you actually guide what the panels should have?
No, actually, it all came. The artwork came to me, and then I had to sit there and look at it and see how could we structure it, what we wanted to put on one page. Did we want to have one image together or like 5 images together? Where exactly the text is placed in relationship to the image? I think that's also quite important when you're telling any kind of graphic story. So that I worked on, and then later on, Jonathan, who is our designer, had some sort of suggestions about how we should play around with it as well. So that came on later. And there were parts of it, because one thing about a graphic novel is that it's sort of a linear, we were attempting to have a linear narrative. Whenever you put anything down in text, you end up with more of a linear narrative than anything else. But the Patua tradition, being an oral tradition, sort of goes all over the place. It starts off with Sita, but then suddenly it'll be in Hanuman's voice, and then suddenly it'll be in somebody else's voice. But for it to be Sita's Ramayana, and we liked that concept, we needed to stick with sort of Sita's perspective through. But there were certain points in the story, obviously Sita doesn't see what's happening during the war. There's a huge part of the story that she cannot tell, she doesn't see it. So how do we tell those parts of the story? So then we had to go back, for example, from the Kamba Ramayana, I took the character of Trijata, who has a lot like Sanjaya in the Mahabharata. She has a sort of a Doordarshan ability. She has the ability to see the future. She has the ability to see things that are happening around her. So when Sita is sitting in the Ashokavana, she doesn't know what's happening on the battlefield. It's Trijata, because of her ability to see what's happening, who tells her what's happening, who's winning, who's losing, and that's how we were able to continue the story of what's happening there. But it's also, it afforded us an opportunity to sort of nuance this perspective even more, because Trijata is Vibhishana's daughter, but she doesn't choose to go with Vibhishana to Ram's side. She chooses to stay in Lanka, being Sita's jailer, with her kinsmen, with all her, and when she is narrating what's happening on the battlefield to Sita, she's watching her kinsmen, her cousins, her uncles die. And that really gives it a completely different perspective,
I
which
didn't know this character. I mean, everybody knows Vibhishna. I didn't know that he had a daughter. And the interpretation that in Kamba Ramayana, she's actually a consort of Sita in the Ashokavan and giving this. I never knew that. So a lot of things what I found interesting about the book is that you get to know, because, and I didn't know that it's actually it's a melting pot of actually different forms of different interpretations of Ramayana, right? So to know that through the book was very interesting, because otherwise, what does the Ramayana bring, what does a new retelling of Ramayana bring to you? Because everybody knows, I grew up on Amachara Katha and then the Ramayana series, and in my childhood you'd make the bow and arrow with broomsticks and play with your friends. So everybody knows the Ramayana. And as a comics creator myself and as a publisher, one of the biggest, my pet peeves with the comic industry in India is everybody's just doing the rehash of mythology where you have Hanuman come in as in armor and then fight, modern day Rakshasas or even early day Rakshasas. So that's what I found interesting about the book, where if you're going to tell the story and retell it and give something new to a reader, for somebody who hasn't read the scriptures but knows Ramayana as well as probably any other Indian does, to get that kind of perspective, I think was interesting about the book. And also I think, Tara does a beautiful job producing the books, and the art was actually spectacular. I think her art is,
I think the art is the main thing of the book. I mean, I've been going around talking at lit fests, but I feel it should be Moina here talking about it, not me.
No, I think because as a writer, when I did Hush for the first time, it is a completely silent book, and then people ask, so what is the writer doing in the entire story? Because people think that the only dialogue is what a writer writes, but I think it brings a certain perspective, because if it was just the art, I think it's not going to be as easily readable as when you have a writer to guide the voice, right? And I think the best writing in comics happens when the writer is actually silent and the artist actually works a lot.
And you could talk a bit on the process, because you consulted 4 or 5 different versions of the Ramayana, including Navanita Dev Sen's piece on the way Ramayana is read by the women in central India. So if you could talk a bit on that, that will be interesting, because where you arrive at this book, because it's one thing that the folk artist is doing it her way or his own way, but the way you structured it using the local Ramayanas, that was a more interesting part of the book. So if you could talk about
Thank you for saying that, Vishwa. Nabanita Dev Sen wrote this phenomenal article called Women Retell the Ramayana, which sort of looks at a lot of the oral traditions around the Ramayana. When I was growing up as a girl, I sort of read and watched on television the kind of predominant Ramayana of our day, and it's always seemed to me, and I know a lot of other women feel this way, a very male-centric kind of story. But when you delve into the oral traditions, like Nabanita Dev Sen did, she found other kinds of Ramayanas, the Telugu Ramayana, the Patua Ramayana, these versions which are told by women, sometimes working in the fields. They are bits of songs, they are scrolls, as in this case, where a sort of different female-centric point of view emerges. It's not necessarily feminist, but it does put the female experience sort of at the center of it. For example, when women are singing about the Ramayana in the fields, they're talking about the problem Sita had delivering children on her own, and this is something that they relate to, or being abandoned by her husband, again something that they relate to. There are songs in Andhra which say, don't marry your daughter to men from Ayodhya, which again, it's a completely different perspective of the Ramayana than the one in this generation we're accustomed to. And that's what comes out of some of these oral traditions. We also have 2 textual Ramayanas that are written by women. In the 16th century, Chandrabati wrote the Ramayana, where she went so far as to call Ram a wimp for his actions towards Sita. Mola, who was from Andhra, was a Dalit, and a potter's daughter. And at that time, the Ramayana was sort of the province of the upper caste Brahmins. But by rewriting the Ramayana in the vernacular language, she sort of broke that boundary and made it accessible to everybody, regardless, and made the Ramayana everyone's property. So there have been revolutions in the way the Ramayana has been retold, some of them by women. And I think this is something, I was glad for the opportunity to work on Sita's Ramayana, because I learned more about the ways these things happen, and it's a way of also bringing this back to the public consciousness, that there were these traditions, there were these things happen with the Ramayana. The Ramayana is not necessarily the monolithic story that we know of it as today.
Thank you, Samhita. We're going to come back, and I want to move on to Vishwa's work now. So could we show Vishwajyothi's work?
Before that, I'll just tell you briefly about my work. My first book was called Delhi Calm. It's a graphic novel set during the 70s in Delhi about the emergency, and it's a full-on political graphic novel. And that sort of typecast me into becoming a political graphic novelist. I mean, Siddharth Bhatia is here. He'll know that these days I do nothing but raving and ranting about the Aam Aadmi Party on social media. But after that book happened, I mean, it just gave me a new platform to talk about political history through graphic novels. And when we started working on the next book, which was an anthology on the partition of India, when the publisher said that we have this idea, why don't you work on this? So I thought it's a great opportunity because partition is something that concerns the entire subcontinent. It's something that we have dealt with in our history books, but the fact remains that it's also something that we deal with in our everyday lives, especially if you're in the northern part of this country, or in Bangladesh, or in Pakistan. It's something that you deal with or negotiate with. Even our generation works on with in everyday part of their lives. So for me, that was the main focus as to how does the third or the fourth generation deal with partition. So that's when we came across, we started this book called This Side, That Side, and it's got narratives from Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh looking at the same piece of history. And it's actually not looking at the same piece of history, it's actually living and negotiating with that part of history in our daily life. So we have quite eclectic stories which have used a bit of poetry and a bit of reportage, but we also have some real lived stories. My favorite being the story from Pakistan in Lahore. It's a real story where a Lahori family moved from Lahore to Delhi, and a Delhi family moved from Delhi to Lahore. And the third generation meets in England, and they discover that the now Lahori lives in the house that the Delhiite's great-grandfather had built. So it's too much of a beautiful coincidence that usually happens in a Manmohan Desai film. But this is something that was really lived. And I said, I mean, this is the best story that this book can have. So it has stories like that. It has stories of identity. It has stories of migration. It has stories of people coming and going back, people coming and thinking they will go back and they never could. So for me, what's interesting is how the same piece of history is looked at from different perspectives. For me, it's almost a subcontinental Rashomon. So you use the same footage, but the edits keep changing. So for me, that is interesting, the way we look at history, the way we look at common, our own textbooks. I mean, I was playing cards in Lahore once with a friend, and then he won, and he trumped the cards, and he said, this is for Victory Day 1965. So I said, what happened in Victory Day 1965? He said, we won the war. I said, no, in our school we were told we won the war. So, you know, it's the same history, and then it changes colors. And that is the interesting part of the subcontinent, that we are trying to create our own identities, but we are really failing to do so, because the Chola Bhature in Lahore are as good as in Delhi, or as good as in Dhaka. So for me, that is the takeoff point of this book, as to how do we deal with it on a day-to-day basis.
Vishwa, how did you see? I think how many creators are there in the book? 50, about totally.
48 contributors
48
across the thing. But the thing is, 48 contributors. It's also because the form is nascent in India, and it's practically non-existent in Pakistan or Bangladesh. So there had to be a workshop. There had to be ways to, you know, start telling people how to do graphic novels, which can be, you know, made in an interesting way. Because one of the usual reaction that we got is partition, history. How can you deal with it in a comic? So, you know, that's something we have to deal with, and something we'll have to deal with for the next 10 years as much. So what was interesting is that when people collaborated, they had to trust each other, right? Like George is one of the collaborators, and the story that I gave him is actually 5 pages, and 5 pages for me would mean 15 pages, and he brought it down to 4 pages. So, you know, how does that collaboration process work is very interesting for me, especially across the border. So we have a Pakistani writer and an Indian artist, or an Indian writer and a Bangladeshi artist, and they all interpret it differently. So I think that was interesting, is how do we deal with our own work and our own egos vis-a-vis how much can we trust with the collaboration. And that is a learning from me, actually. Yeah.
And what I noticed in the book is also predominantly most illustrators are from India.
Yeah.
Is that because the form is, I mean, you have more illustrators in India, or is it because you didn't know as many illustrators from Bangladesh and
Yeah,
Pakistan?
I think it's not that
population of
I
India?
didn't know as many illustrators from Pakistan and Bangladesh, and I really looked for a lot of them, but yeah, some couldn't work out, whatever. So yeah, that's why. And we have most of the stories are from India, but
How did you find the contributors from Pakistan and Bangladesh? And see, because especially it's not people who lived during the partition,
Yeah.
right? These are like third generation, fourth generation people.
right.
So, and being in Delhi, I'm guessing that you also, and because you're also from Bengal, you probably, like I'm from the south, right? Partition doesn't even affect us in any remote way. For most of us, I mean, in the south, we don't even know, there's no aftermath, there's no consequence. no
Interestingly, there are 5 contributors from Bangalore in this book.
No, they are probably illustrators, or they're probably third generation whose parents lived through partition. But I'm my
Yeah.
entire family is from here, so we don't even know what the partition was. But how do you find interesting stories? How did you select the stories that you felt okay? Because now it's subjective. You're curating the entire collection, right? And you say, okay, these stories work, these stories don't work. How did you go about that process?
See, I think the first template that we set for ourselves that there cannot be another book on the burning corpses and the burning trains. One was that. The brief was very clear: is how do we deal with it? I think that was the focus. So I knew a few stories. I knew a few people who had these stories, like that Lahore story. I knew that guy, so I just told him that we have to have your story. But he said, who's going to illustrate it? I said, the guy whose house you're living in is going to illustrate it. He's an architect. So then we had to get him and do that. But we had an open call for entry. At the very beginning, we had a very open call for entry, and we took, I think, 2 or 3 stories out of them because most of them fit into the usual narrative of partition. And then we did a workshop in Bangladesh, so we got a few stories from there. And I knew some amount of good friends in Pakistan who are artists and who have worked around the medium, if not directly, but through their own work. And they helped out, and they referred to it further. For example, we have a miniature artist from Lahore, and she has interpreted a Dastan Go story, which is set in UP in India. And she had never done it before, and neither she had seen a Dastan Go video performance. So I sent her a few videos, and she saw that, and she completely interpreted it her own way. So for me, what's interesting is that how we, when we collaborate, as what is the editorial limits we can take up to?
That was my next question. Were there conflicts between, like you're saying, there's a clash of egos. For example, somebody in Bangladesh has gone through a personal story, and somebody in India is trying to imagine what that person has gone through. So were there conflicts? Did you have to resolve things? Did you have
We don't have to talk about this in the session, but I know because the 6-page story that George was sent, and he made it into 4 pages with 6 lines, and if he had his own way, he would have deleted even those many 6 lines of words. And the author was, what is it? This is my story, and it was a completely, very well written piece. And she said, this is going out of the window. So I said, I do not want to know about this. I just need the story. And they sorted it out for themselves. But there was an interesting story from Bangladesh where the illustrator completely reinterpreted, including changing the words. And that took the writer by surprise. He says, but my sister's not worried. Why have you said my sister's worried? Those kind of things. But then those things sort themselves out, and yeah, it works.
No, it's never an easy job to, because your writer has a certain vision in their mind. Like when I write my own stories, and I collaborate, and I can't draw. So you're trusting your artist to actually, give life to your words, and it's never easy because you seeing a certain way, the artist seeing a completely different way.
Yeah.
You'll trust them to do their job well, and especially it's personal stories. When you're doing fiction, I think it's fine because, okay, you can trust them, you're an artist, you can visualize it better. But when you're doing personal stories, especially changing the words, I think for writers is a big no because that's all you have, your written word, right? And in comics, people look at the pictures and writer, okay, he's there, but the art is what? Anybody who flips through a comic, you look at the art first. You don't look at the words at all. But yeah, I think
but artists have a different perspective. They think person reads the story, the words, and then moves on. They don't really go into the details of the picture. So it's a classic, catch-22 or a chicken and egg situation. Yeah.
Okay, now, so what interested me about this session also is that you have Samhita who's dealing with mythology in some way, and that's like our storytelling for the past thousands of years. There's Vishwa, who's taking partition, which I think in a few decades will become a huge, take on its own mythical proportion amongst generations who haven't been born yet. And you have Apupen, who's actually creating his own mythology, his own world building through the adventures in Halhala. So can we have, yeah,
So you're not talking,
No.
Pratik?
sorry?
You're not talking about your stuff?
No, I'm not talking about my stuff, no.
Everyone knows Pratik, right, from the intro and all. Have you brought some slides to show?
No, I'm not talking.
Okay, he's a writer, so he doesn't have any slides to show. It's okay. Can we get to...
Can we have Apupen's work on?
I make stories from a world I call Hala Hala, and I'm just working on the third book. It's being printed. No, I want you to go out of this to the main folder, and you will see the main reason why I'm here is because there's a book coming out like next month or so. It's just to plug the book, and I want to show the cover, but he's not cooperating. It's called Aspirus by Apupen. I want you to show the first picture, which is alone.
The fifth.
First, yeah, that one. All right, superb cover, right? Okay, everyone see this in the store, go and buy it. It's mostly like wordless, so most illiterate people can also read it. These are just slides from the book. Yeah, a lot of stuff happens in the book. We go out to the folder. I'm just going to take you through a few of the stories or something. The centerpiece, the third one, the third folder. Yeah. The centerpiece from this book is, it was actually made around Moonward time, which was 2008 or something. And Rakesh, who's also here somewhere, yeah, Rakesh told me that this looks like another book. I think you should move this out of Moonward and maybe work on it or something. So it stayed with me for another 6 years, and it's become a book. And no, I don't want you to click it. I want to talk while I'm looking at it.
Can you go back to the first slide? In
Yeah,
this
that's
section?
it. You know, like once upon a time, there was a dreamer. Now you can go to the next one. He had a dream one day, told his friends about it. And they told him it was a great dream. Like most artists have these friends who tell them, like, you know, yeah, nice one and all that. Dreamer loved his dream. He's totally obsessed by his dream, that means. So he made a house for the dream. So the dream was too big for it. So the dreamer built a small town, but the dream grew bigger. Then the city was built. That's where most things go, huh? But it was empty, and the dream mostly lives in people's heads, so it was kind of upset. So the dreamer thought about it. He knew that everyone was looking for their dreams, but maybe they just didn't know where to look for. So he named the city, and he just had to help them that way. He addressed the people of the city, called them all together, and he showed them their dream. And he told them that this is the dream that all of you guys have been looking for and all that. And they all believed it, like everybody in Bangalore, and they all lived happily ever after. That's the centerpiece from where the story takes off into chapter 2 and 3. That's it, folder out. And it's also the only part where I've used text in the book. The rest of it is kind of silent. I don't know if we have time to go through that. Okay, then I'm going to go to the first folder. This is something I usually neglect, and I've taken it up because this comic strip has been running in the Rolling Stone magazine for like 5 years now, and we're just completing like 60th issue this month. So I wanted to show it. It's also the center part of the storyline. It's been running for a while. This is like some issue, I don't know. So Rocco's the hero. He's just been chosen. He doesn't really know chosen for what, but Jimi Hendrix chose him, so he thinks it's something important. And you've been chosen. You are at the beginning of our story. Two wandering musicians were lost in an endless desert. They ran out of food and water. Soon the legs could go no further. Dying of thirst, they decided to play their music and welcome the end. Seemed like the end. But the music made them feel better, and they played into the night. And then they started playing more, and then the ground became alive, and it just got to the core of the world, and spring started rushing out, and their life started over there. And by morning, even though there was honey and all kinds of fruits there, the point I'm trying to say is that with music, they weren't really hungry by morning. So then, the land became like really happy. More people came. Everybody heard of the thing and all. More and more people landed up, and it became like this little nice little village of harmony. And then the word spread about it, and news of the magical land traveled to dark corners of the world. And these little thingies came, not little, sorry, big thingies came, and they kind of started eating the music. It was kind of addictive, and they were just finishing it off. And the rock people were really like worried when the friends appeared, and they drove the eaters away. They told the rocks whatever and all. Basically, they're like the music industry people, and they like locked everything. And they took charge of the city, and they built a wall around it, and they told the people how to like behave and everything. And they had contracts and agreements, and everything was illegal, and bands were banned, and rocks worked long, hard shifts. They achieved targets to retain their place in the city with the music, and then New Rock City was formed. Now you can come back and like figure out the rest of New York City from the continuing series in Rolling Stone magazine. Thank you, back.
Thank you, Apupan.
Okay.
Can you go to the first picture he showed, the cover for the new book, Asperus? Just outside all the other folders. Yeah. I'm just curious, this is probably your most symmetrical cover, right? This is like a proper book cover as compared to what you've done. I think Halhala, again.
Do you hear that? I put out like 2 books otherwise. This is a proper book cover. Okay.
No, I'm saying
Yeah.
No, do you want, because Moonward had a very strange cover.
Yeah, Moonward wasn't really cover savvy at the time. I didn't want to like highlight the name and all that. So I put it at the bottom, which seemed like a mistake later, because when you put it on the stands, you'd only tend to see the top part. This is also not really the top part, but you can, in the final one, you can see the Harper logo on the top. And I think that's a seller. This one, the idea was more to go all out like a brand or like something that you really aspire to and everything. So that's why this thing looks like a dragon also. It's supposed to be the sweet dragon that invites you in and sort of catches you there. I just tried to put contrasting colors and make it very like an ad or like a
Yeah, it has a very poster feel to it, right? Does the dragon also appear in the book, or is it just a device?
Yeah, he's the guy called Asperus.
Asperus.
That's the name given to this thing. You don't really say what he is. If I say it, just spoil it.
But do you have a connecting thread between the story you told in Moonward, the story you told in Halhala, and Asperus? I understand they're all part of the same world, right?
Yeah, and pretty much that should be the connecting link. You'll find the same brands, you'll find the same characters, sometimes repeating, same buildings, even like, some are there. Many characters have actually repeated now. This also has the history of one of the characters who've been explored in Legends of Halhala. So those ways the connections are there, but I'm pretty sure now that I don't want it to be one physical world. So we keep changing the world called Halhala as to suit the story. And that is what should be unique about this Halhala, because I tried to like draw these mountain ranges and say, river runs through this place and everything, and it looks like a Tolkien world at the end of it, and that's probably quite limiting with the kind of stories we are dealing with in comics.
So essentially, Halhala will exist in the minds of the characters in which.
And the readers, like,
And the readers.
Yeah. You should,
Sorry to interrupt the panel. We have just about 5 more minutes left. Thank you.
It's just getting interesting now. You could give us 10 more
So
minutes.
sorry about that.
Okay, people, we already had a session outside in the lawns, and that's after which we came over here. 5 more minutes. I don't even get to the first question in this. Okay. So I'm going to ask one question. I think since all of us, I think it's been an interesting session here.
Okay, you can take 10 more minutes. If that is
Awesome, thank you.
You can push to 15, just 5 more minutes after that. Okay, I'm going to ask a question which somehow doesn't apply to both Vishwa and Samita because of the nature of stories that Apupan is saying. And this is a question that doesn't have an answer, and I'm sure you won't give the answer also, but I'm just going to ask the question. Like, where did this originate? It's like you asked, like when you're writing fiction especially, how do you create the characters? Where do you get inspired for the story in Halhala? Where does that come from?
I'm pissed off with a lot of things, and I try to get off on something, I guess. So comics come in, and it's sort of become the escape now. You just tend to go in and create some stories, and you feel kind of secure there. When you get out and you see most of the things around, you kind of feel like running back home and sitting at the table again. It wasn't intended that way, but it's become like this sort of escape plan, which I'm totally like living in right now or something. Stories and ideas have been very interesting. I've always wanted to tell stories. I tried all this film and animation and stuff. I don't have will get the budget to do anything in that. This requires only my time and my skill. So that's why I sit at home and I do this. But this book also deals with the beginning of an idea and stuff like that. So you don't really know where the idea starts from. And the idea comes into a dreamer's head from somewhere. And then the dreamer puts the idea out, and then it goes into a territory where the dreamer really doesn't have any control over that idea either. The idea grows out of control. And then the dreamer is not responsible for what the idea makes people do and stuff, you know. So there's a conflict of this creative thing over there. So that's also one of the themes pushed in.
And do you have a grand plan for this is third book. Do you know where this is going?
Yeah, I'm planning to make 6 movies and 1 television series with like some 7 seasons or something. But I'm working on it. Yeah. I have to build this world up. I have to do these cross connections. That is where the interest is primarily. I want to try some animation soon. Yeah.
George, if for the audience here, if they were to read one comic, you know, and I'm sure as comic readers we can't nail it down to one comic, but if you were to suggest one comic which you think they should read, you wouldn't? Okay,
don't read that one comic. Just read many comics, please.
I'm sure many people won't start with many
what
comics.
to start with? That can be very dicey. You need to know the person, because sometimes you tell them Watchmen or V for Vendetta or something, and then that's it. Their comic career is finished. Like, they don't read anymore. So I try to start with something like Shel Silverstein or some silent stuff which, you know, you can just like flip through or something. If the reader's not very like into comics. Vishwa, what do you think? What do you make the reader like?
One comic.
Yeah, if you
what
have
do
to
you
do one
start with?
comic.
As an audience here, if they haven't read comics before, what do they start with? According to you, which is the book? Maybe it's a book that inspired you to become a creator, or it's something you think that, like you say, I think silent comics work because you don't need to understand, you don't need to be read English.
Craig Thompson's Blankets.
Okay. Samhita, what do you think?
I'd go for the Sandman. I don't know why. It's my favorite comic.
So there's Sandman, which is 11 volumes. If I were to add a suggestion, I would say start with the 11th volume, which is called Endless Nights, because it's not connected to the main narrative. But I mean, that's what hooked me into, a lot of comics. Blankets, definitely. If you're romantic at heart, then that's like a brilliant book. And as George said, I think silent comics, give a name, no? Name one silent comic which you like a lot.
There's Albert and the Others and Aileen and the Others.
Yes.
There are these 2 small books. They're really nice. It's
Guy Delisle's books,
I made my mom and my sister read it, and those were good indicators. You know, like mom doesn't go into my comics either, so that was good. Yeah.
Can I add another one? I really like Sean Tan's The Arrival, which is a silent.
It's also
True.
I'm afraid we crossed the 10-minute margin. I'm sure the questions can go into with the audiences also.
Thank you
in the
very
next
much.
15. Fine.
Thank you, Samhita, Vishwa, and Apupan for joining us today, and all of you, wonderful audience. We had a fest earlier where the only people were us and the other people at the fest. So it's good to see an audience actually come early in the morning
And
to
that,
a place like
that
this.
one was called a carnival, so we expected something.
Yeah, so thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Traditionally has always been suited to a younger audience. So when you write comics, how do you adapt it to different age groups? Do you even start off with an age group in mind when you begin?
Okay, correction, comics aren't meant for young kids. First of all.
Perception.
Perception, yes. I think as a writer, none of these comics are all ages. I'm sure Apupan's comics aren't all ages for sure. I think Sita's Ramayana probably can be read by a younger audience. I don't think Vishwa's comic could also be read
So
by an
Vishwas
audience.
again can be across generations, right? So if I look at my granddad to me, the sentiment may be interpreted differently, but in terms of the theme, I think that's something that everybody can relate to. So are there certain episodes, are there certain themes that you try and maintain constant, or what is it that you begin with?
No,
I believe I myself read comics. So if I read comics, I can also, there are people like me who read comics, and they would be interested in the issues I'm interested in, and that's what brings me to the drawing board. I'm not trying to make this my work comprehensible for a 6-year-old. It's not, and I should not even expect it, and I should not expect my work being a beginner for a comic reader. I'm working from the platform that people who read comics are the people who are going to read my work. So that's how I work.
Samita?
Well, Sita's Ramayana was a bit different because I wanted it to also appeal to, sort of appeal across age groups. Like an 8-year-old should be able to pick it up, and a 20-year-old should be able to pick it up. So I wrote it with that in mind. That sometimes can be difficult to keep a register that will appeal to both. Difficult, but that's the challenge of it, I think.
I think also as creators, you most of the time make stuff for yourself as an audience. I mean, I think that's when your truest work comes out also.
Otherwise, there's always Bollywood.
Yeah, otherwise it's always Bollywood. I mean, so you're trying to reach a mass audience. I don't think, especially in a medium like this, I think you're trying to write for yourself and probably your immediate circle of people whom you rely on, people who would like the story. I don't think you're trying to write for an entire audience at all.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is it? Hello. Yeah. Listening to all of you talk and also being a little familiar with the field, I just want to know what is new that we suddenly have comics now taking on the gravitas of a graphic novel. I mean, that's basically the point that all of you are making, that the comic is not just limited to Betty and Veronica and so on and so forth. So what is it that has happened what is in the air that has now given this seriousness, or you see something serious coming out of this genre?
Well, comics have been used for different mediums, for different issues across for a very long time. Comics have been used for health education, comics have been used for gender sensitivity, comics have been used for development, comics have been used for science, demystifying science. That has always been there. One of the biggest contribution of comics is that it's made a big dent in the educational space. But I think the takeoff point was Maus, which was Art Spiegelman's memoir of his father and surviving the Holocaust. But it didn't appear out of nowhere. I mean, it's come out of small strips that had been appearing in the newspaper in New York since the 1930s. So when political cartooning is also a medium that has lent itself to the graphic novel format, is that from a pocket you move to a strip, to a story, to a book. So I think that's the evolution of a graphic novel. And such graphic novels have been around for at least 40 years now. So yeah, I mean, it works for different mediums and across different spaces.
Actually, recently we did something about this comic boom thing. I have some friends who are business pundits and everything. So I got them to tell all the investors in US and everywhere to put more money into comics because it's going to become like a booming scene. And that illusion is what is making it big right now. We haven't made any money, but some big businesses think that comic is going to be a boom. Like this Liquid Comic or Virgin Comics or Gotham Comics or whatever it's called. Those kind of people and all, they want to make things for movies. We are not the kind of people who are looking at the boom and making things. We just happen to be there, The buzz is somewhere else, really, if you see it. It's about the superhero movies that are coming in all the malls. Everyone in Kerala knows, like who, what's his name, Black. What's Arrow's name in Avengers? Hawkeye is, That's quite something for comics to achieve. And that is where the buzz comes from. What Vishwa said is true, comics can be achieved for everything, and that's what we're trying. But it's a little far away for us.
I just want to add something. You talked about the evolution of the graphic novel, but when I was working with Sita's Ramayana, this was a question that came up quite often, is what do you call a graphic novel? And if you look at it that way, I mean, anything that mingles graphics in a story can be really called a graphic narrative. So, the Patuas have every right to claim that, and that's just a different form of it. Or we can look more contemporary and see graphic novels evolving in the last 40 years, and partly due to the rise of cinema and the kind of cinematic language. I mean, you see that influencing the kind of grammar we use in graphic novels. So it's I'm not sure if it's just happening now, but it also happened. I mean, if you look at it that way.
Yeah, in Indian folklore tradition, I mean, graphic novels always existed.
It's also a term of respectability, I think. Comics generally, and when Bill Eisner coined the term, he wanted it so that it would go out of the medium or the perception that is meant only for kids and appeals to a larger audience. Also, I think what has happened in India today is most of the creators who are in the forefront of the space in India today have been reading comics as kids. And then they've been wanting to try and do something, bring their own stories into a form, and that's how I think all of us are doing comics right now. But the graphic novel, I think, as a term, I think it's just
I think
respectability for comics.
we have also more open and exposed editors
Yeah, I think-
who have been reading comics themselves, and they've been open to the idea of publishing graphic novels. I think that is a huge contribution.
But I think very few editors in India actually, very few. Like,
But we have 10 writers, so we have 4 editors. That's fine.